Hi, I'm Imani Oakley, and I'm running for Congress in New Jersey's 10th Congressional District, and this is my Justice Gauntlet. Now I'm going to talk about the third Reconstruction. As you all know, this country is rife with a history of oppression and manufactured disadvantages towards people of color in this country. We need to rectify that. And I want to do that in several ways. One is I am a very, very big advocate for reparations. I believe that it is time, and I believe that we really are not going to fix the wealth inequality and other inequalities that exist between people of color and their white counterparts in this country until we have a very serious reparations program. And in order to facilitate a reparations program, I want to bring a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the forefront. What this National Truth and Reconciliation Commission would do is several things. One, it would release studies on the history and impact of racial injustice in this country so we can have an official and accurate record of the things that happen to people of color, including Indigenous people in this country. Second, we would also be using government resources and government funding to build databases so that we can identify those who identify as Black today, who are the descendants of people who were enslaved in the United States, in order for us to get an accurate number and see exactly how much we're going to have to put towards reparations. Once we have that, I look forward to having that data and then working with my will-be staff to figure out the exact numbers of how we can facilitate justice with regards to reparations, as well as other forms of reparations that will not be in monetary form if those exist. Another thing that I would like to bring as far as the third wave of Reconstruction is issues around housing. I want to focus on those. As some of you may know, when the initial GI Bill was created, Black soldiers who fought in wars and fought for this country were still denied the benefits of having houses. And the thing about having a house and getting a house from the government, very low interest, zero down payment, is that later you can put that up for collateral when your kids go to college. Later, you can put that up for collateral if you want to, get something else. Later, you can pass that on to your grandchildren. It is a very huge wealth builder. And while I understand that there are very large issues with capitalism, I think that we also need to rectify the fact that our Black GIs were not given this benefit. And that's why I want to create a program where the descendants of these Black GIs who were denied housing can now go through the government and work with us to get those low interest, no down payment homes that were denied to them in the past. And so those are just some ways that I want to facilitate a third wave of Reconstruction, because we really cannot put this off any longer if we really want to find a place of justice and true equality in this country. And now for gun reform. It's no secret that mass shootings have really increased in this country. And a lot of that has to do with these loopholes that people can get and transfer guns across state lines, have access to automatic assault weapons, and those types of things. I want to make sure that we create a stoppage to those loopholes and have common sense gun reform in this country. Additionally, I want to place a ban on anyone who has a history of domestic violence or a history of white supremacist violence from being able to obtain a firearm in this country. Third, we also have to think, we're thinking on the front end, but there's a lot of damage that has also been done, and we have to think on the back end. I want to make sure that we are funding the necessary trauma centers that are going to be needed to help people heal from any wounds that they may have via shootings, and having to live possibly in neighborhoods or having experienced the mass shooting, and make sure they're getting the mental health that they need, as well as the trauma health and help that they need as well. And now I want to talk about LGBTQ plus rights. In this country, just like we have discrimination against people of color, we have discrimination against people for who they love and their gender identity. That also has to stop. And that's why I have several plans to help address LGBTQ rights in this country. One, I want to fight against LGBTQ homelessness. Right now, LGBTQ plus youth are homeless at extremely high rates as a result of fleeing circumstances that really are not healthy for who they are as people. I want to make sure that we are fully funding grant programs to help nonprofits and any other entities that are dealing with this issue to make sure that we can have housing for these youth and other folks who find themselves in this situation. I also want to fund any civil rights institution within the federal government to make sure that they are adequately funded with regards to investigating and enforcing rights regarding LGBTQ rights in this country. Moreover, HIV and AIDS should not be criminalized in this country. I want to make sure that I'm supporting any legislation that stops criminalization of HIV throughout the entirety of the United States. Finally, being LGBTQ plus is nowhere near a crime, and it is not a mental illness. There is absolutely no reason for there to be conversion therapy operating in any state in this nation. And I want to make sure that I bring a national ban on conversion therapy and support any legislation that also does the same. So now I want to talk about housing, an issue that is actually very, very close to me. So I'll start with a little bit of a story. My family nearly lost our house to foreclosure. My mom changed jobs and took a $20K pay cut, just like every average American does from time to time. And then the mortgage companies combined our taxes and our mortgage rate per month without notifying anybody. So our mortgage skyrocketed with zero notification. This really should not happen. And as a constituent advocate, when I worked for the United States Senate, I had a portfolio that dealt with foreclosure and mortgage issues. And when I dealt with that, I saw how mostly Black and brown people, mostly older people, are being really, frankly, screwed over by banks and lending companies who trade their mortgages, up the prices on their mortgage through different fees, don't properly notify anybody. And then you have people who have these 30-year mortgages, have been paying on time per month. They are very financially savvy. You have them and their homes that they raise their kids in, that they're probably looking to leave to their kids and their grandkids, suddenly go into foreclosure. That is a completely unfair and backward system. And that's why I want to place a ban on banks doing anything to a mortgage without notifying both digitally and through traditional mail services previous owners of the mortgage. Additionally, when a bank sells a mortgage to a lender or a lender sells a mortgage to another lender, I want to ban the practice of those lenders being able to slap these fees onto these mortgages and increasing the monthly payment, the monthly mortgage payment required for homeowners. It is an absolutely backward system. If somebody agrees to pay something per month and they pay it for 30 years on time, guess what? That's an excellent customer. And those are not people that we should be going after and taking their homes. Absolutely not. And I will be putting a ban to that practice once I'm elected to office. Moreover, I know that issues surrounding housing have more than just foreclosure and mortgage issues. There are also issues with renters and making sure that our renting facilities are also affordable. And that's why I want to bring the Livable Cities Fund. The Livable Cities Fund will give government grants to large municipalities who bring community land trust to neighborhoods, put a cap on rent, and who also make sure that there is 50% of affordable housing in all new developments that were built since 2018. It's no secret that our communities are being vastly and swiftly gentrified. We have big developers coming in and creating these huge development buildings and making the rent astronomical, where nobody who was originally from that neighborhood would be able to afford to live there. And then they give a measly 30% or sometimes less of affordable housing within those units. And we are being pushed out of our homes. It's time for that to stop. And therefore, I'll be helping large municipalities stop that type of behavior by bringing the Livable Cities Fund to them for helping to, again, bring community land trusts, create rent caps, and any new developments created after 2018, making it 50% affordable housing. So now I want to talk about reparations. I want to go on record and say that I am 100% in favor of reparations, not only for the descendants of people who were previously enslaved in this country, but also for our indigenous populations who have had their land stolen and who ever since have really been treated as second-class citizens in this country. I want to bring a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission whose part of their job will be to create research around what was done as far as what has this government done, as well as local governments, what have you, to really oppress people of color as well as indigenous people. And then I also want them to create a database that really tracks folks who identify as Black today, who also had ancestors who were enslaved people in this country. Because we are really not going to get to a point where we have true equality in this country until we rectify those past wrongs. And there's really just no way around it. We cannot continue to dance around this fact. And whether it's economic reparations or some other form of reparations that the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission will find in their research, we really have to get this done. And that's what I want to do when I come to office. And now I want to talk about defunding the police. The first protest I ever attended that I can consciously remember, I was 6 years old. And the reason that protest was happening in my town was because some teenagers threw a party in the house behind mine, and police came, shut it down, and then got really, really brutal. And the neighborhood came out and stood up for those young teenagers. And ever since then, I've been living just through everything the way you all have. I've seen the shootings and the recordings of the shootings. I've seen the murders. I have seen the extreme brutality that police have when it comes, especially to people of color. And it's time we start taking a completely different approach to law enforcement. And that's why I'm in favor of defunding the police. And a lot of folks will try and flip that and twist that to mean, oh, I want to starve policemen. I want to make sure they don't have a salary and they can't support their families. But that's a twisted version of what defund the police actually means. What defund the police actually means is to make sure that we are putting the adequate funding towards trauma centers, putting the adequate funding towards social workers, putting the adequate funding towards mental health experts, putting the adequate funding towards community partnerships, and all of these types of things that aren't forceful and violent in nature in order to fix the ills that currently plague our communities. And that's why, once I'm elected, I want to send government matching funds to states that are defunding their police and putting that funding towards those programs that I just mentioned. So if a state decides to take a certain amount of funding from their police and put it towards, let's say, a trauma center or trauma centers throughout the state, I want to provide that state with matching funds to help them in that endeavor so we can really start to take a lot more peaceful approach, and an approach that's going to make sure that our, especially Black and Brown folks, are really protected from the types of oppression that we've really seen come at the hands of police. Now I want to talk about combating domestic terrorism. As you all know, and as we discussed earlier in this segment, oppression based on race in this country is nothing new. However, what we're seeing now is white supremacy spread. And one might argue it's spreading faster than ever as a result of the fact that white supremacists can now organize digitally and organize online and spread misinformation and hate through quick digital means. I want to do things to combat that and put a stop once and for all to the spread of this toxic ideology. In order to do that, I want to create a robust domestic counterterrorism program strictly focused and strictly tailored to combating white supremacist violence. And the reason I emphasize strictly tailored is because a lot of times these counterterrorism programs end up affecting people who are fighting for their rights and their humanity. So it ends up hurting the left, it ends up hurting Black Lives Matter organizers, and it ends up hurting people that really have nothing to do with the domestic terrorism that we're facing, which, in case you didn't know, white supremacist domestic terrorism is the biggest domestic terrorism threat in the United States currently. That's why I want to make sure we're having a narrowly tailored counter-terrorism program tailored specifically towards white domestic terrorism that will, one, identify the ways in which white supremacy and its ideology is being spread throughout this country, but then also identifying ways in which we can put a stop to it and put an end to the spread of this ideology, whether that be counter messaging or other forms. We really need to start taking this seriously and having a narrowly tailored plan to combat this. Similarly, white supremacy has also spread on a global scale. What's happening in this country is also happening in Europe. It's also happening in places like South Africa. We're also seeing it to a degree in Israel. We need to make sure that we are combating white supremacy wherever it may show up. And that's why I also want to make sure that I'm working with my colleagues to make sure that we as the United States are being as supportive as possible to help other countries combat global white terrorism and white supremacy.